Your great-grandfather, sleeping in a frozen foxhole during World War II, probably stayed warmer through the night than you do right now under your expensive down comforter. That's not romantic nostalgia talking. That's pure thermodynamics and forgotten wisdom that the modern bedding industry desperately hopes you never figure out. What those soldiers knew about layering blankets has been completely lost in our obsession with high-tech fabrics and marketing hype. But the science behind their simple arrangement is about to change how you think about staying warm forever. Walk into any bedding store today and you'll be bombarded with promises. Memory foam that remembers your body. Microfiber technology that regulates temperature. Down alternatives that breathe better than actual down. It's all incredibly expensive and mostly nonsense. The average American now spends over $400 on a comforter that performs worse than 3 wool blankets our grandparents could buy for $20 total. We've been sold a lie wrapped in polyester and marketed as innovation. Here's what nobody tells you. Most modern comforters rely on a single thick layer strategy. One puffy duvet stuffed with down or synthetic fill, designed to trap air and keep you warm. Sounds logical until you understand that a single thick layer creates hot spots and cold spots, doesn't adapt to changing temperatures throughout the night, and loses effectiveness the moment you shift position and create gaps. Your body temperature fluctuates naturally during sleep, but your comforter just sits there like a thermal idiot, unable to adjust. During World War II, soldiers fighting through European winters and Pacific nights didn't have heated barracks or climate-controlled tents. What they had were wool blankets, standard military issue, nothing fancy. But the way they used those blankets made the difference between hypothermia and survival. And it wasn't about piling them on randomly. It was about understanding a principle that modern science calls the layer effect, but soldiers just called common sense. So, the British Army issued these detailed instructions for blanket arrangement that, at first glance, might seem almost comically specific until, well, you actually try it yourself. The first blanket goes under you, folded double. Then the second blanket goes over you, tucked tight at the feet and sides. The third blanket is placed on top of that, overlapping but not aligned with the second. If you had a fourth blanket, it was arranged perpendicular to create what they called a crosshatch pattern. Each layer trapped air differently, and each layer responded to body heat independently. Together they created a microclimate that adapted throughout the night as temperatures dropped. Now, the American GIs in the Battle of the Bulge faced some of the coldest combat conditions of the entire war. Temperatures dropped to a bone-chilling -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Frostbite casualties rivaled combat injuries, but, soldiers who mastered the blanket layering system reported staying relatively comfortable, while men just yards away in sleeping bags suffered. The difference wasn't the material. It was the method. You see, every layer of fabric traps air between itself and the next layer. Air is actually one of the best insulators on the planet, which is why hollow fibres and down clusters work in the first place. But here's the critical part that modern bedding often ignores. Multiple thin air pockets perform exponentially better than one thick air pocket because they prevent convection currents from forming. In a thick comforter, warm air near your body can circulate away from you, replaced by cooler air. In multiple thin layers, that circulation gets interrupted at each boundary between blankets. Think of it like this. A castle with one massive wall might seem stronger than a castle with 5 thinner walls, but the castle with multiple walls forces invaders to breach each barrier separately. Cold works the same way. Each blanket layer forces heat loss to start over, creating cumulative insulation that one thick layer simply cannot match. World War II quartermasters didn't need laboratory studies to prove this. They had something better: soldiers who lived or died based on whether the system worked. The layering approach also creates what thermal engineers call zone regulation. Your core generates more heat than your extremities. Multiple blankets let you adjust coverage differently across your body without an all-or-nothing approach. Too hot? Stick a leg out without losing upper body warmth. Core overheating while feet are cold? Adjust the bottom blanket independently. One thick comforter gives you exactly 0 options except throwing the whole thing off and freezing, or keeping it on and sweating. Wool was the standard issue material for military blankets, and there's a reason synthetic alternatives never fully replaced it despite being cheaper to manufacture. Wool fibres have a crimped structure that creates millions of tiny air pockets within the fibre itself, separate from the air pockets between blankets. This means wool provides insulation even when compressed, unlike down or synthetic fills that lose effectiveness when squashed under body weight. But wool's secret weapon is something called hygroscopic properties. The fibre can absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture without feeling wet to the touch. When you sleep, you release about a pint of water vapour through breathing and perspiration every night. Modern synthetic comforters trap that moisture against your skin, making you feel clammy and cold. Wool absorbs it, moves it away from your body, and actually generates a tiny bit of heat through the absorption process itself. It's kind of like having a dehumidifier built into your bedding. World War II soldiers sleeping in damp foxholes or humid Pacific jungles understood this intimately. A wool blanket might get damp on the outside, but it continued insulating. A cotton blanket soaked through and became worse than useless, actually pulling heat away from the body. Synthetic materials hadn't been invented yet, but modern testing shows they perform even worse than cotton in wet conditions. Wool remained superior then and remains superior now for anyone dealing with variable humidity conditions, which is basically everyone who sweats or breathes while sleeping. The specific order and orientation of blankets matters more than most people realize. Starting with a folded blanket underneath you serves double duty. First, it prevents heat loss downward into whatever surface you're sleeping on, whether that's a bed frame, a cot, or frozen ground. Second, it provides cushioning that keeps your body weight from compressing the blankets above you too severely. Soldiers learned quickly that sleeping directly on a thin pad with all blankets on top meant waking up with a frozen backside, no matter how many layers covered the front. So, the blankets above you should be arranged with the heaviest at the bottom, closest to your body. Now, this might seem counterintuitive, but it's actually quite critical. You see, the heavy blanket conforms to your body shape better, eliminating those pesky gaps where heat tends to escape. Meanwhile, lighter blankets on top provide loft and air trapping without weighing down the lower layers. Each blanket should overlap the one below it, but be offset slightly, not perfectly aligned. This prevents cold spots, where blanket edges might line up and create a thermal bridge straight through to your body. Now, the final touch that soldiers swore by was tucking the whole arrangement tight at the bottom and sides. Not tight enough to restrict movement, but just enough to prevent drafts from sneaking in and destroying your carefully constructed thermal envelope. You know, modern bedding with its elastic-fitted sheets and loose duvets lets cold air circulate freely underneath and around the edges. But the old method created a sealed cocoon that only opened where you needed it to, at the top near your face, where you could regulate fresh air. Laboratory testing of bedding uses a heated mannequin in controlled temperature environments. But real sleeping happens in rooms where temperature fluctuates, where you move and shift position, where one person might be a furnace while their partner is an icicle. The blanket layering system adapts to these real-world variables in ways a single comforter just cannot. You wake up too warm at 3 in the morning? Well, simply peel off the top blanket. Still too warm? Remove another. Each adjustment is gradual and controlled. The system also handles temperature drops throughout the night without any adjustment at all. As your bedroom gets colder toward morning, the multiple air layers in your blanket stack provide increasing insulation automatically. The physics just works. Cold air has to penetrate through more barriers to reach your body, and each barrier gets more effective as the temperature differential increases. A single thick comforter provides the same insulation at midnight and at dawn, which means it's either too much or too little, depending on the time. Soldiers rotating through guard duty especially appreciated this adaptability. Coming in from hours in freezing temperatures, they could pile on blankets and warm up quickly. Returning to a warm bunker after patrol, they could strip down to 1 or 2 layers without completely remaking their sleeping area. The modular nature of multiple blankets gave them control that served different situations with the same basic materials. A quality wool blanket today costs between $60 and $90. You need 3 for a proper layering system. That's roughly $250 total for bedding that will last 20 years with minimal care. A premium down comforter costs anywhere from $300 to over $1,000 and needs replacing every 5 to 10 years because the fill breaks down and shifts. The math isn't even close, but the bedding industry has convinced us that complicated equals better and expensive equals quality. During World War II, military logistics favoured wool blankets because, well, they were durable, repairable and effective. If a blanket tore, it could just be stitched up. If it got stained, you could wash it. And when a blanket became thin, you could simply layer it with others. There was absolutely no planned obsolescence built into the design. Now, compare that to modern comforters, with their delicate shells that rip so easily, their specialized fills that tend to clump, and care instructions that honestly often require professional cleaning. It seems we've traded durability and functionality for marketing stories and profit margins. The blanket layering system also gives you flexibility modern bedding just can't match. Too warm in summer? Well, just use 1 or 2 blankets. Freezing winter night? Pile on all 4 or 5. Got guests staying over? Just pull blankets from your stack. Kids need a little extra warmth? Loan them a layer. One expensive comforter really does one thing at one thickness. Multiple blankets, though, adapt to whatever situation you face. Everything you need to know about staying warm at night was figured out by men sleeping in conditions that honestly would kill most of us within hours. They didn't have marketing departments or laboratory testing. They had frozen toes and the motivation to solve a life-threatening problem. What they discovered was a system so effective that modern science can only confirm what practical experience already proved. Multiple thin layers beat one thick layer. Wool beats everything else. Proper arrangement multiplies effectiveness. You don't need to sleep in a foxhole to benefit from what those soldiers learned. You just need to honestly reject the expensive lies the bedding industry sells and trust in principles that kept men alive through the worst winters of the 20th century. 3 wool blankets, arranged properly, will keep you warmer than any comforter on the market, cost less, last longer, and give you actual control over your sleeping temperature instead of hoping your duvet's marketing claims match reality. If this deep dive into forgotten World War II wisdom gave you a new perspective on something as basic as staying warm, go ahead and subscribe to the Pacific War Chronicles for more practical history that actually improves your life today. These aren't just stories about the past. They're solutions that worked under pressure and honestly still work now. Share this with anyone who complains about being cold at night or wonders why their expensive bedding disappoints. The answers our grandparents knew are worth remembering and worth spreading. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep rediscovering what actually works.